Hello, welcome to SquishiVision. Ignore the fact that when my stuff uniform, I just finished watching Strange New Worlds. What I didn't just finish watching was How to Train Your Dragon 2025 that I watched last week. And in preparation to watch How to Train Your Dragon 2025, for as far back as when the teaser trailer got released about a year ago, I have done a lot of prep work to prepare this film. I watched How to Train Your Dragon 2020, How to Train Your Dragon 2, all 8 seasons of the Cartoon Network and the Netflix series Dragons, short films, Legend of the Bone of a Dragon, Book of Dragons, Gift of the Knife, John of the Dragon Races, and then How to Train Your Dragon The Hidden Worlds, which has left me still to watch the 2 remaining, I think, short films, or 1 remaining short film, also all the seasons of the preschool program because I'm a completionist, and I think maybe a few other things. It's left me with this really specific and niche photographic memory of a layout of book, and I do not know how to use this new skill, except for when I was watching the film, and somehow instinctively picking out how every building differed and matched the animated version. Which was distracting. Also what was distracting was the fact that Stoic, obviously, because he's voiced by the same actor, played, or rather, the same actor who voices him, sounds very same, but he also very Scottish in the animated version. Gobbler and Spitelau are now English in this film, which is really distracting because, and I don't know why, and just to kind of break my script here. Spitelau being English, actually, I like Spitelau's voice in the animated versions because it's very much an exaggerated David Tennant Scottish accent. I don't like replacing. I know the issues of Nick Frost as an actor, but I just don't think he plays the warmth of Gobber that comes from Craig Ferguson's portrayal. So I think Nick Frost is a massive, not necessarily miscast. I mean, I can see it. Just I don't know. Maybe it is a miscast. It's feels like his attempt that I practiced from Hagrid, but the show that shall not be named because it's just cursed for various reasons. There are also like really minor differences in like certain characterizations. Like a lot of this film it's not, people keep calling this film a shot-for-shot remake. It's not quite a shot-for-shot remake. There are definitively both new scenes and scenes which aren't shot the same way, but there are also scenes which are shot exactly the same way. And a lot of the scenes set in like this area between Toothless and Hiccup when they're bonding are shot very, very similarly, if not exactly the same. But Toothless doesn't always react the same way. And I can't pick out specific examples because of my weekend commitments. It's been a week since I watched the film now, and if I did this straight away, I maybe would have been able to kind of off the top of my head between more things. But like, it's just very off-putting that the film goes to lengths to recreate how Toothless acts in like some ways, like it to be Pixel is the exact same movement, and other times they do a different thing. Like, one example I can give, that's what's in the trailer, is the way that he reacts to Hiccup about to stab him. Is his eyes go wide, whereas in here they go thinner, and I don't understand that. I think the wider thing shows fear much more. There's some scenes where like Hiccup's trying to Toothless is trying to work out Hiccup, and he does something friendly towards Hiccup and reacts a certain way, and it's more endearing, and you can get a much more stronger sense of like chemistry connection between them and Hiccup in the animated thing. And it's not like done poorly in the film, but like I can tell it's not what Hiccup. I can remember it's not what Toothless did in the film. I'm like, why would you change it? It's like, it's not as if it's like a physical actor who either doesn't want to, or like it would be impractical to force them to recreate movement for movement the same kind of interpretation as another actor, or as an animation. This is like, basically you can program Toothless to do what you want, and they will do it perfectly because they're like, this is the other strange thing about Toothless, is that obviously Toothless is both CGI, obviously, in both the animated version and this version. Like, the animated Toothless is a computer generated animation because it's 3D animation. So in essence, the model is the same model, and like they keep the same they design, and I think rightly so. They keep exactly the same, except they just make the texture look a bit more realistic. Except by the time we get to 2019's The Hidden World, we've already reached the norm where animated films, not just DreamWorks ones, but other films, are already doing like photorealistic textures, even if their artistic style was still remaining artistic and like cartoony. They were trying to make the like textures more realistic, and then you can see that in some of the shots in The Hidden World where they're flying over like a waterfall, and like if you took away the dragon and the characters, you wouldn't know if you're watching a film or a CGI animation. And so like it's really weird because like it's kind of like this is an animation. This is like it's almost fan made. It feels like someone's basically got the animation and like put it through. Do you know what it is? It's like when you see them. It's like when they remade Portal using the RTX technology. And it's the same game, but now everything's photorealistic, and it's not bad. And it's a new experience. And like I still have to play the RTX version of Portal because I want to replay Portal. It's a great game, and also it makes it have a new experience. Because I'm not feeling like I'm redoing what I've already done. It's kind of like that. But because Toothless is still like Alexa, volume 0. Earlier. Because Toothless is still very much an animated character with their very much animated character behavior, which is somewhat anthropomorphized, it still like invokes this kind of Roger Rabbit feel to their existence. I do think both Thames and also Parker do a really decent job at recreating Hiccup and Astrid separately. There is something lacking in their chemistry together, and my theory is it's because, again, it's not a Shop remake, but it does try very hard to be a near Shop remake, and there are clearly parts where both Thames and Parker are trying to recapture the mannerisms, and certainly in terms of Thames, the voice of the original cast and animated movement in the animated versions, and I think it's this kind of uncanny valley where yes, they do it fine when they're playing their characters separately, but when they're trying to, chemistry isn't something like the chemistry works in the animation, but because they're trying to concentrate on recreating those movements, they're not so much, I think, naturally trying to bounce off each other. Because when I think good chemistry is when you bounce off your scene partner. So scene partner acts a certain way and you play off of that and you change your performance. But because they were trying not to change their performance, they're trying to remain faithful to how the animated version did it, I think. Not all the time. Like, obviously, they clearly, again, not a Shop remake, and I really much doubt that they were, like, that much strictly micromanaged. Maybe in some shots, but not, like, I hope, like to think, not all of it, because that's bad filmmaking. I think enough that they weren't able to, like, naturally. I think you've got these two actors together and just told them to, like, do a new scene with these two characters, and it wasn't one of the scenes from the original film. You might see better chemistry, maybe. Or maybe they just don't have the chemistry together, in my opinion, the key scene in the first film by far is Hiccup and Toothless's first proper flight. And my feelings on the adaptation are mixed. I mean, on the one hand, the need for a realistic look, I think, takes away a lot of the magic of the animation. Like, for example, the fact that it has a real camera look, so it looks like it's shot on a digital camera rather than a CGI, rather than a computer camera. Like, you've got all the motion shaking. I mean, there's obviously motion shaking animation, otherwise it looks too clean. But the more realistic, the more realistic camera shaking they put into it, the fact that detail you lose some things really too fast, the fact that you can't lock onto the scenery, it's always like the Hiccup and Toothless blend into scenery much more than they do in the animated version, because you can't like pop the scenery or pop the actors out for scenery that much, because they're trying to make it look realistic and therefore a bit more flat. I think that takes away a lot of the magic. Despite the fact, both in this scene and several others, I have to admit, DeBlois does recapture the magic of the original film that he directed, and like I was grinning and like kicking my feet slightly during fight sequence, even though it's not quite the same. I think that's really the takeaway from this. I'm not supposed to get live action remakes, but as far as live action remakes go, I think this one certainly is probably one of the best. I mean, those people who like it, who also watched the original, were like, you know, it doesn't add anything new, but it made me feel like I was watching the original film for the first time again, because it feels new enough, but new. I think that's kind of really where the selling point of this film is. I had no problem with the live action remake of The Lion King, but a lot of people didn't like it purely because it didn't recapture the magic of the kind of the anthropomorphization of the lions, and so that was distracting, and so I didn't feel like they were watching the original again. Whereas because it's so accurately reproduces Toothless's like charm, that people who love Toothless are like, I get to love Toothless again, but in a new way. And I think that's really like why this worked, where The Lion King 2019 didn't work. Obviously, there were those people who were like, what was the point of this film? Because of like how shot for shot identical it was. Like, why bother? Is it like a money grab? I think also the fact that it's a sim director come back to remaking it helps. Like, even if you want to, you know, you would be totally like out of line to suggest that this was just basically a cash grab, and there was no other kind of like, there was no like artistic merit behind commissioning it. I like to think that DeBlois, because they're the original director of the films previously, would at least be like, well, you know, if I'm doing this for the money, at least let me put at least I will try my passion into it. I never got the feeling that he was just like throwing it in for the money. I feel like he like, well, okay, I'm getting paid a lot of money to do this anyway. I'll also like make sure it's good, and I think that does come through. It's just because the original film is still better, and it always will be. That's just the inherent nature of these, and it feels like it's hard to like sell. Like if you were like, if I was gonna choose between which one I would like, if I had to watch either the original or this and know a film, I'd watch the original. Maybe I'd then watch the live action thing straight after, like rather than watching the original twice. But that, you know, it's always gonna be second to that. And I feel like that's gonna be the exact same assessment if they make, well, they are making How to Train Your Dragon 2 remake. I do like there are some Easter eggs, I think, referencing the cartoons, the TV cartoons. I can't remember if, maybe I should have checked by this review. I cannot for life remember in the original How to Train Your Dragon when Hiccup goes through the Book of Dragons. Are things like Whispering Death mentioned in there, or because I can't remember if there's, or whether Whispering Death was an original creation in Dragons. In which case, it's nice that this film references the TV show, because that's very unusual to do. I actually really do like a TV show. It is very much a show aimed at a young audience, and so it does have those sometimes very simplistic and frustrating plots, but also it always stays true to their characters, and I think it helps that most of the original cast, certainly the important ones from the films, also contribute towards the characterization of the TV show, because it never felt low budget, and especially as we get to the later, like the first two seasons I think are much more kind of like direct TV of the week adventures, but then once you get to like Race to the Edge and things like escalating, and it's much more kind of like drama and impact, and as someone who isn't like hugely massively fussed about romantic plot lines, I think the way that Race to the Edge builds up Astrid and Hiccup's relationship from being friends to being... I mean, look, okay, I have a soft spot for battle bonded friends who have each other's back and trust each other because, I mean, maybe that's what I lack in my own life. And the fact that, you know, actually, it's really interesting because like the TV show kind of like retcons the film. The film was have you believe that Hiccup and Astrid become a couple at the end of this film, as is the kind of tradition for the timeline of films. So you've got time to kind of stuff build, and you want your protagonist and your love interest to get together, and for the protagonist to get the girl as a kind of a trope. And I think that's maybe one of the reasons I never hugely liked romantic kind of plot lines in films, because it felt really like too I guess I know for some people the fantasy element of that romance is kind of what makes it magical and appealing. For me, it's a turn off. So I actually kind of like the TV show retcons and does that, and like at first you're like, this is really weird because like Astrid acts like she has this interest in Hiccup. They're friends, so they don't go back to being to her having that kind of dislike of Hiccup or that prejudice against Hiccup. But there's no like interest between them. Like somebody hinted at, and you've got the running gag of Snotlout continuing to try and like flirt and like get with Astrid. And it's like, well, this is weird because did you not know that she got with Hiccup? But like it's established that doesn't happen. And like that for the first 2 seasons, and it's weird in a lot of ways. Riders and Defenders of the Edge and of Burke and Race to the Edge are kind of like 2 separate shows. They feel very different. I mean, one came out before Hashtag Dragon 2, the other came out after Hashtag Dragon 2. But they do continue directly from each other, and they're kind of the same show. It's not until like I think the first season of Defenders of Race to the Edge. Part of me thinks that Defenders is kind of better tap for the rest, but I guess they kind of took it. But anyway, that it gets hinted at. It gets slowly burnt, and it's like it's interesting because I like the way the show builds in the relationship as it being that these two come together because they grow to like and trust each other through the situations they're in, and like Astrid reliably proves herself to be this really like trustworthy second in command and like support Hiccup, and I really do like that kind of like build up. There is this weird kind of plotline thrown into the film. Oh, this is also another thing is I guess I got a comment on this. The film goes out of its way to tell you why there's an ethnic diversity that isn't present in the animated film story, and it depends on how you interpret this as either being a departure from the original film or just a reclassification, because original animated law establishes that the Vikings of Burke have been there for multiple generations. I can't remember. I do think this is the exact number, but I can't remember what it is. And this film establishes that Burke was a settlement created purely simply to go and fight with dragons from different tribes. I guess they don't necessarily contradict each other because it isn't necessarily established in this film when that happened, and how far back that happened. You can kind of infer it might be recent, but it could have also just been historic. But the film, obviously, there's not much kind of racial diversity in the cartoons, which I guess is the big kind of like downside. And this film is like, will you all come to the tribes around the world? You can, and it's a bit weird because like you Asian appearing person, you came from the Far East, and you black person, you came from this African tribe, and in some ways, like it feels unnecessary that you need to like got your way to explain this just to be like you can't accuse us of like diversity for no sake because we've established that this is why this has happened, so shut up. And that's kind of like good, but they kind of preempt that. But by the same token, this is both good and bad. That's fairly realistic. We know that history is whitewashed. A lot of civilizations that we have historically seen as being depicted as very white pure aren't necessarily as white pure as history, even like less so than we think. Like certainly like the Roman Empire is depicted in a lot of popular culture as being very white, but we know for a fact that there are a lot of people that in this civilization are people of colour, and indeed some of the people who put on political powers and emperors were people of colour. And I think I don't know if I don't know for sure. I'm like presuming here, so I might be wrong. I assume that is probably the case in the Viking era, even if it isn't documented, that there probably were people who travelled up north and settled, and you'd have that mixing pit. So on the one hand, yeah, also saying that is then being like, this is historically what probably happened as well, but also it's kind of like, you don't need to appeal to that kind of person, you know? It's a fantasy film. These aren't actual well, I guess they do call themselves Vikings, but not actual Vikings, they're not actually dragons. So there's this weird kind of like scene thrown in, which I wouldn't. It felt weird. So there's a scene where Astrid face. Well, it's not one scene, but it kind of climaxes it. It kind of accumulates at one scene and it kind of never gets picked again. Basically, like a lot of the kids tease Hiccup as being a Nepo baby because he's the chief's son, which I guess is all well and good, and it's interesting about the protagonist. It's interesting. Okay, well, firstly, this is never present in the animated version. Is my first kind of thing, and the way the film, but also the shows depict Burke, is it never seems to establish that stoic chieftainship gives them any particular class privilege. If anything, it's seen more as a responsibility and a burden than it's ever depicted as a privilege. Well, I mean, it's also a privilege in terms of like great power that comes to responsibility and privilege. It's never depicted as like. It is depicted as hereditary, but it's never like you never get idea. Stoic's never depicted as as having like a lot of creature comfort. Multiple characters call their houses big, but we never really see anyone else's house or living conditions have any kind of like form of like context. Maybe Stoic's family has a particularly big house. Certainly in the animated shows, there's nothing to imply. I think I go back to my artistic recollection of Burke's layout, that their house is particularly bigger than anyone else's house. But we don't really like explore the interiors too much. But like Stoic gets stuck in. He's very much on hand to deal with issues. I suppose he doesn't do a lot of like manual labor in terms of like farming, but he does do a lot of work in terms of like keeping like Burke safe and its defenses and all the planning. When Burke needs like repairing, he's definitely like pulling his weight there. So does Hiccup as well. And Hiccup works both in this film and the original film and the original canon as a blacksmith's apprentice. So like, even though like they are the chiefs, they're never depicted as like kind of royalty, depicted more as you would expect like them to be depicted. So it's kind of weird, and this is in the film as well. Like, there's nothing to suggest that Stoic has any kind of special like creature comforts, and yet the film wants us to kind of like throw in this kind of like class element where Astrid, who is obviously depicted as a person of color in this film, is all like you'd everything given to you on a plate. It's not clear what Hiccup's actually given. No, that's not the case, but it's not established like in the law. And Astrid's like, oh, and I like earn everything that I got. It's like it's not clear how she struggles either. In fact, if anything, she has higher social status and standing than Hiccup does. She's a captain of the fire team, and again, she might have like worked for that, but it's not as if like Hiccup has any prestigious position. Everyone looks down on him. People, like in the film, people like actively want to avoid him. He's really like an embarrassment. It's kind of the film is trying to have this kind of this progressive commentary, but doesn't really season it, and it doesn't pay off either. Like people accuse Hiccup of this, and they're kind of like, well, is the point that actually you shouldn't assume someone who is born into a royal family, so to speak, and a white male necessarily has privilege, because that's an anti-regressive kind of reactionary message, or was it just like really poor execution? So it's kind of weird if we were that in. to the film. Okay, well, those are my thoughts. It's almost 3 o'clock. I've got work in like 7 hours, so I'm gonna get off. Alright. But thanks for tuning in. Try my hardest tomorrow to watch Eyes of Wakanda because I'm not very sure. Yo, and then we've basically caught up. I need to catch up. Actually, no, I need to catch up on the Star Wars shows. Tales moving around. But yeah, thanks for tuning in, and frankly, please, at this point, just get out of my house.